So now, talking about the time, at Basho and working on Riak, living through sort of the boom around NoSQL, whether that's a good term or not, well, we won't, get into that conversation. But I think now we're at a point where the market has matured and kind of understands there are different tools, right? Different tool for different job. So kind of looking back on that whole experience, are there, what are the observations that you have kind of having lived it from the inside?
Sure. A newfound appreciation for how hard that stuff really is. I thought I sort of had this hubris having come from Akamai and done other distributed system stuff, and everybody sort of did. We definitely learned some lessons and some humility about the task of writing distributed systems. I think you'll see these NoSQL databases continue to mature and continue to find their own sort of niche. But I think the real bigger lesson is the sort of renaissance of distributed systems.
Yeah.
That's a bit larger than databases. You see renewed interest in things like consensus protocols. 5 years ago, if you said the word Paxos, which is a consensus protocol, nobody would know what you're talking about. And now it's sort of part of everybody's conversation. And this is, I think, a natural outgrowth of cloud computing and the fact, and also the tasks that we're trying to take on with computers.
Yeah.
As
I've
they
read
get
Paxos for Dummies, and I'm not dumb enough to understand it.
Yeah, I
it's
still
pretty
don't
tough.
get it. Anybody who tells you they understand it is lying.
But there's been a sort of explosion
Right.
in these types of systems, whether it's things that people have done internally, like going back to even Chubby, then Zookeeper, now etcd. There's there's another one.
etcd, there's the
Yeah.
Raft consensus protocol, which, speaking about how Paxos is notoriously hard to understand, Raft is a consensus protocol that's very similar to Paxos, but the number one sort of criteria for the design was having it be understandable.
Yeah.
And I think it is more understandable than Paxos, and it's definitely been more popular. I think Paxos had such a bad name that nobody even tried to implement it. And if you Google around for Raft now, there's 1 million implementations, probably 2 for every popular language. And the protocol itself underpins a lot of these new types of systems that we're talking about. HashiCorp, they have I forgot the name. They have etcd. The CoreOS team has a bunch of things that use Raft. What it's really about is just coordinating either the state or the behavior of the larger and larger groups of machines that we now need to get our jobs done.
Yeah, well, being a network, someone who's, been passionate about networking for my whole career, you always see the distributed systems diagrams and that little line, and that little line doesn't always behave the way, one would like it to.
So ad hoc implementations of these things were fine for a long time. People, Akamai comes out with its State of the Internet report, Mary Meeker does her thing, and usually a theme in that is users growing impatience with unavailability or latency over time. It's always going down. The number of, it used to be measured in seconds actually, but milliseconds.
Sure.
As people get less and less patient with things being slow and availability becomes a priority, you have to take a more formal, sort of rigorous approach to coordination.
Having come from Basho, where you built, storage systems for, to ship to customers, could you talk about some of the differences of that environment versus, Twitter, where you're operating a service, a web scale service, and building systems for your own use?
One of them is just the model of developing something as a service versus a product. With a product, there's a moment where you have to just say, all right, we're releasing this and sending it to all your customers. At Basho, we had limited visibility in a lot of cases to what the workload and what the use case was. It was sort of a game of telephone about what people were actually doing with the database. So when you're operating as a service, not only do you have more data with which to design and develop the database, but you also have the agility to, if something breaks, to fix it immediately without the cost of having all your customers upgrade.
You are a heavy Twitter user. And
So
what
that-
was
yeah.
what was the most what was tell me one or two things that were surprising when you actually got on the internal side.
So yeah, some people were puzzled by my decision to go there, and you're right. A lot of it was my sort of love for the
medium,
the
yeah.
product. I was actually worried that my I don't think it's too controversial, but whatever, that my sort of Twitter persona was going to be a barrier to being hired there, which would have been ironic. But I haven't got a talking to yet. Definitely interesting to go back to a big company, publicly traded company with
Sure.
all the stuff that entails. Besides really loving Twitter, the product, I think that you're bound to do this being early at a technology company that's doing something new. You eventually end up as a sort of marketing sales
Yeah.
person, So the last 3 years of Basho was just airports and hotels and sales meetings.
Yeah.
And after a while, imposter syndrome and all that, I'm like, God, can I even code anymore?
Yeah.
So my goal and what I sort of asked for as I was, exploring going there was just to get right back in the thick of it, developing features. And so that was a new experience, and it's been great actually. I do most of my coding in Java, which I think at one point I swore I'd never
Yeah.
programmed Java professionally. But my God, it's amazing how far both the language and the tooling have become. I don't think anybody would have would have predicted that it would become such a dominant systems programming language back in the days where it was being marketed for, interactive television
Yeah.
or whatever.
Write once, run anywhere.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's fun. It's again fun and sort of scary to have a service that you're responsible for.
Right.
I only caused a couple of minor outages at Akamai and have yet to cause any disasters at Twitter yet. But give me time.
Hey, you guys survived the World Cup.
The World Cup, yeah, that was exciting and fun time to be there.
Yeah. So kind of reflecting back, we've kind of come the full breadth of your career, reflecting back, having been at Akamai at a pivotal, explosive growth stage of the business, doing essentially, being on the core team and early, at Basho, working on Riak, when you're talking to the next generation of young distributed systems developers, what would your advice for them be, as they're thinking about entrepreneurship?
I think it's important to be a generalist, even though I was just complaining about, having to be a sales guy
Yeah.
and a marketing person. I think a lot of engineers early in their career have a disdain for those other parts of the business, but there's actually some sort of fascinating problems to deal with there, and I think being well-rounded in that regard is good. It's important, I think, to stay curious. Every time I've been in a hiring role, curiosity is really one of the number one things that I look for. Also, it's important to keep a decent but not unhealthy amount of cynicism about
Yeah.
new fads. Says the guy who sort of took one of these new shiny things and made half a career out of it.
It does seem like the number of new shiny things and the rate at which the next shiny thing
Yeah.
arrives seems to be increasing.
Right.
It's kind of fascinating evolution
Yeah.
in the technology space right now.
Yeah, I think, for every new thing that comes out, go back in computing history and find out what it is the second iteration of
Right.
to get maybe a flavor for its true character. Definitely don't get too caught up in the sort of Silicon Valley networking hype. I won't deny that it's convenient to live out here in terms of the number of opportunities, but the sort of entrepreneurship scene, I think your time's probably better spent reading papers and coming up with an idea rather
Right.
than trying to make connections. And just try lots of things. More importantly, try to cultivate a life outside of computers, which is
Yes.
something that's traditionally been hard for me. I've very rarely separated work and play
And
much.
yeah.
Yeah. So I, at times that I've gotten burnt out in the past at various jobs, I've had this great existential fear that I don't find programming fun anymore.
Yeah.
And that I was just condemned to a
Turn
life
on some more
of
Smiths
drudgery.
and go into the cave. Yeah.
Get into music, go out and see things, hang out with people who aren't in the industry, and by way of that, you'll find opportunities,
Yeah.
or at least become an interesting person who doesn't need to network so much to meet people.
Yeah. No, that's great advice. Well, thanks for doing this today. It's been a lot of fun, and
you.
we'll see you around.
401.